Good evening. Welcome to the Venture Brothers podcast, season 7, episode 4. This is the Venture Brothers podcast brought to you by Graphic Policy Radio. Love the Venture Brothers cartoon, but afraid of missing the plethora of historical references and layers of meaning behind each episode? Join pop culture and history experts Elana Levin, that's me, and Stephen Attewell, that's him, for our podcast examining each episode of the hit Adult Swim show. Definitely be calling on Stephen's experience as a professor in New York University. Quite a lot for this episode, I imagine. Through this podcast, this season 7, episode 4, The High Cost of Loathing. I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about the subject of the title. It's a riff off the Sandman graphic novel spin-off, Death, the High Cost of Living, which I feel like is one of the most everyone in the 90s Reddit moments of pop culture from like indie comics, indie comics, alternative culture stuff. Yeah, I mean, as like
alternative comics is actually a little bit more descriptive since, Vertigo is owned in whole cloth by DC.
By DC,
so
yeah.
Was not independent.
You could certainly buy it at any store, including the Barnes & Noble, in which the copy that I borrowed surely had been purchased in the first place.
Right. And it's also just a reference in general to the high cost of living, because it's tied to a whole bunch of different plot elements that we'll discuss later in the episode.
And hey, if you haven't read Death, the High Cost of Living by this time, you should. It's still good. I think it holds up last I looked at it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, all of Sandman, I think, is pretty good. There's some elements that
not aged well.
A bit 90s, but... So, we start this episode with an interesting sequence. I didn't notice that it said 2 months later, and, it was just me noticing that they do a lot of interesting, time stuff this season. Rather than having sort of discrete... slice of life episodes or, sequential stuff. It's a lot of sort of skipping back and forth. Mm-hmm. So here we see the Monarch's crew attacking a venture industry ship in a sort of smoothly coordinated military assault that was reminiscent vaguely of Captain America Winter Soldier and Under Siege. I wasn't sure.
I think it reminded me of Under Siege as well, although I've only seen Under Siege 2.
Right.
But yeah, I think the Captain America one in particular, there's something about the way it was shot. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a direct reference.
And the guards getting taken out one by one without a chance to say anything. That's very much like that opening tracking shot.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that sort of immediately caught my attention is that both the Monarch and his henchmen, including 21, have a lot of new tech. 21's Wolverine Claw is a lightsaber that actually functions. They're all wearing snazzy black uniforms, and as you point out...
Yeah, it looks a lot like the Death's Head panoply outfit that the Monarch wore.
Except it actually works.
Yeah, except it actually works. I think it was season 2... The episode where he actually goes and slaughters all of the Hank and Dean clones, he sort of envisions he actually wears this ridiculous immobile getup, and there's even a playset manufactured of his Death's Head panoply, and he's definitely wearing a functioning version of that in his fantasy.
And I also noticed that one of the things that his fancy new suit can do is it has a version of what I think is the Captain America logo plastic wrap thing from Superman 2. Because one of the venture guards gets stuck to a shipping container, and then sort of vacuum sealed with a Monarch logo.
Oh, I didn't know that was a thing. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so they busted open a crate of J-Watches, which are clearly iWatches.
Owned by Venture Industries.
Right, because, in this universe, Jonas Venture Jr. is effectively Steve Jobs. He created the J phone, he created the J watch, so on and so forth. So then they sort of open the crate, and it's enriched uranium, and one of the funnier lines, like, it's a total throwaway thing, but one of the henchmen, like, crosses himself and goes like, Madre de Dios. He says, God can't hear you, 26. It's just, like, such a weird thing. And then he peels off the label on the enriched uranium, and it's actually handy-dandy pomade for his eyebrows.
And facial hair wax does come in a variety of quality levels. I understand wanting to stick it out until you find the kind that has exactly the right texture for your needs. We later find out that the particular brand of Handy Dandy, he references this in the bank scene later, contains ambergris, which is precious, precious whale barf. And as a waxy residue, ambergris probably has been used in people's beard care and eyebrow waxing and mustache waxing products back in the times before whales were protected species. So, great job, guys. Great job.
And also, it seems like a bit of a Oh Brother, Where Art Thou reference. I mean, there the pomade was Dapper Dan.
Good call.
But the logos are fairly similar. And we're, like, this was all sort of like, my brain was not quite meshing into gear. And when I realized, like, oh, it's a dream sequence, is when Dr. and Mrs. the Monarch shows up as Tinkerbell. And then all of a sudden the Monarch wakes up. And it's pretty clear that he's been sort of daydreaming as Dr. Z has been doing his... I forgot what the acronym stands for, but it's his villain levels, like, surprise inspection.
Mm-hmm.
And in the real world, like, the Monarch is out of eyebrow product, and his eyebrows look all weird and off-model. The new Monarch army, like, their uniforms are really shabby. It's clear that they just repainted the Blue Morpho cave in Monarch colors, and, like, haven't entirely finished. And the, like, new hover cocoon ship thing is a balloon,
which is wonderfully deflated in a dramatic moment, bursting your bubble. But there's one thing I'm still bothered by. So the henchmen in this episode, both in the fantasy and in real life, they're the folks they're the day laborers who had been working on remodeling the mansion. And I'm still really uncomfortable with this because basically the only Latino characters we have, other than, like, little throwaway parts in this show, are portrayed as day laborers. And I would love to have a really awesome day laborer, like, super villain or superhero within the show, but these guys are just no names. They're sort of depicted being kind of halfway asleep, dozing, not really quite knowing where they are or what they're doing, and I don't think that that's a good portrayal at all. Like, I totally am, I'm not, like, saying that my verdict on such matters is what is going to decide these things, but I just don't think that if you're going to be like, okay, Monarch's in New Jersey now, like, there's totally, a lot of day laborers and we're working on it, this isn't how I would handle it to actually not come off as racist. I think it's pretty gross.
Okay. Well, I mean, at least have them be characters, right?
Exactly.
Let them talk or
exactly.
have thoughts and opinions.
Like you had, we're ready for the next 21 and 24, right? Like, have your henchmen have personalities, and definitely if you're handling, non-English speaking characters, bring in someone else to help you make sure that you're writing that in a way that isn't totally racist, because that will probably be what happens if you're not bringing in any sensitivity to the issue. Yeah.
So, when the Monarch's look gets critiqued,
yes,
he references someone who I don't know at all. So
yes. So they're saying these costumes aren't Michael Kors. So Michael Kors, Kors, is a major American fashion designer. His particular focus is sportswear. He's done uniforms for, like, high-end, things like Olympics and kinds of stuff on occasion.
So, like, in this universe, he absolutely would do superhero fashion.
Yeah. You could totally hire Michael Kors to make your superhero or supervillain outfits. Definitely, I imagine him doing both villains and heroes.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So, unfortunately for him, the Monarch is reclassified as a level 5, and if you remember, back to last season, you know, he needed to be a level 9 in order to hench Dr. Venture, so this is something of a setback for him, even after having killed the Blue Morpho and technically Jonas Venture.
Yeah, it's a bit of a retread thematically. Like, he already spent last season trying to get his points up and high enough to arch Dr. Venture.
Yeah. So, speaking of the Ventures, we see Hank moving into Dean's room, and then calling up Serena. I misinterpreted the intent of this conversation.
I mean, that's just, he wants privacy. He wants a bigger room. He made a really swanky, more grown-up and mature pad and wants to show it off.
Yeah, and especially when we see, you know, his old room. Like, it really is.
Literally an IKEA children's room, yeah.
Yeah. So, Serena can't come over because she's up at, quote-unquote, Stuyvesant University, which is Columbia University. Like, she's on the main quad when Brock drops Dean off for school.
He's like cutting donuts on the quad, which I know is like a trope from college movies, from like 80s college movies. I can't say specifically which, but it's like a thing that they do to establish who are the dominant bad boys. Please excuse me while I vomit.
Although it's slightly strange because in reality, that's like cobblestone and asphalt. There's no lawn where he is.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things that I thought, like, my mind immediately went to is, wait a second, what is that statue doing there? Someone's replaced the sundial that should be in front of Low Library. And,
clearly it was replaced by a supervillain.
Well, or a statue of Peter Stuyvesant, and, you know, the two are not that different. Stuyvesant was technically the first mayor of New York City, I guess you could call him. He was the Dutch general director of the New Netherlands. He's sort of famous, you know, you learn about him when you're a kid in New York City schools, because he had one peg leg. He built the wall that Wall Street is named after. He built the canal that Broad Street is named after, or Broadway is named after. But on the other hand, like, he was kind of an asshole. Like, everyone hated him. He opposed religious toleration. He, you know, like, stubbornly tried to hold the city against the British, even when they were, like, outnumbered and starving. And just, like, you know, seems to have been, like, a just grouch. Anyway, so in the Venture universe, the sundial in front of Low Library is a statue of Peter Stuyvesant. The other thing that I thought was really funny about this is that, like, Brock's moment of rebellion, there's an actual, like, private street that connects Broadway and Amsterdam at 116th. So, like, as long as you get the nod from the security guard at, like, the booth at either end, like, you can totally drive just straight through. So it was just like a weird moment of sanctioned rebellion. We then go to Dean's future dorm room, where the Brown Widow is doing something medical with his spinneret.
Yeah, he's got to get it cleaned out.
And as he's doing that, we see his side of the dorm room. He's got a Stuyvesant poster, which is clearly Hamilton. So in this universe, the Hamilton musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda was about Stuyvesant. There's a poster titled Rings.
Yeah, I think it's a Lord of the Rings thing.
Yeah, my guess is that someone did a Lord of the... Like, in this universe, someone did a Lord of the Rings musical called Rings.
Right.
Because, like, as they established last season... No, sorry, 2 seasons ago, the Brown Widow is, like, a major Broadway fan and, like, wants to be on Broadway.
That makes sense.
We see a prog rock poster. We see a poster for Treasures of the Onibozo, which I think is kind of a reference to, like, the ubiquitous dorm poster of King Tut's mask. Although I want to say that we've heard the, like, Onibozo referenced before. Like, that the ghosts who were haunting Venture Towers wanted the mask back.
Oh, yeah. That could have been one of those cultures. There's also a nice big Guggenheim Museum, which is real, and you guys should visit it.
Yeah, mostly real. So it then leads to, like, you know, there were a couple moments this episode that didn't click for me, and then the bit where they stumble in and, like, he's naked and has a beaver costume in front of his junk, like, just didn't click for me.
Well, here's the thing. It's not actually funny, but it does feel like it's after a type. Like, there's this kind of, like, college hijinks movie.
Yeah.
That's totally straight out of. And we don't like that movie because that movie is dumb, but that's what that's a send-up of. Yeah,
I was going to say, like, in retrospect, it does feel kind of American Pie-esque.
Or, like, I mean, the Revenge of the Nerds, or, like, any of, like, maybe Animal House. I don't know. Like, all of those weird being wacky guys in college movies that have literally nothing at all in common with any of my college experience. Like, it's from that genre. So I actually think it might even be a moment of anti-humor for all I can say. I don't know if they're trying to be funny. I think they're just trying to cite it.
Okay, that's fair enough. So, the main thing is that Dean's pissed off that everyone's pissed off at their family in this episode.
Yep.
So Dean's pissed off that his family wasn't there, that Hank's only interested in getting his room, that Rusty is signing him up for science classes against his will, and he doesn't want to do that.
I really love that Dean is of course Dean is, like, you know, trying to assert his adulthood and independence by just saying he wants to study other things, but I also appreciate the show not making the equivalence that if you're smart, then clearly you're interested in science, because just because you're smart doesn't mean you have to study science. Right, Stephen?
Well, yeah. Speaking as a professor of the humanities and social sciences. Yeah.
And people's parents try to bully them out of it, and yet here are you and I, you know, with employed and adults.
Or at least semi-employed.
You know, I would perhaps overemployed, but I think that, a lot of people's parents are dictating what courses they should take in ways that are very short-sighted and underplay the importance of writing skills.
Yes.
Lord knows.
And critical reading. Which, you know.
This is how you get Trump, people.
Exactly. I was thinking the same thing. It's like our country could desperately need more critical reading skills. But enough of our humanities grumbling. So the sea captain, dressed like Steve Jobs, gives the financial statement for Venture Tech Industries, and it's not good. They're basically out of money because they've been spending it all on repairing their headquarters from, you know, when it got briefly turned into part of the Ghostbusters movie. And
last week, or I guess 2 months ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Rusty decides to reenact the Hudsucker proxy by jumping out a window because he's reinvented JJ's hover belts. Because every time Rusty Venture does anything, it's always to rip off something that one of his relatives had done.
You need to spell out that Hudsucker proxy reference.
Oh, sorry. So in the very beginning of the Hudsucker proxy, the CEO of a major, is it a toy company originally? I don't remember. Jumps out the window to his death, which starts the events of the movie, whereby a guy in the mailroom gets made sort of a dummy CEO and ends up inventing the hula hoop.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, it's one of the, like, early Coen Brothers hits.
I really enjoyed, like, the way the window glass cutting him up is revealed is this wonderful horror take. Like, he's sitting there laughing, and then the scratches on his face emerge, and then blood comes out, and it's grotesque, and it's scary and gross. I loved it.
Yeah, and
then the body goes limp, and he floats out. It's the most disturbing thing.
And it's really kind of like what the Venture Brothers as a show does best, is, like, think through the rational implications of, like, bits from pop culture. It's like, yeah, you know, the thing about, like, unless you open the window first, like, all of those windows are really strong glass because birds fly into them all the time.
Yeah.
You're gonna, like, I'm surprised that he just didn't pancake pancake on the window inside. But yeah, plot relevantly, a giant shard of glass has pierced his femoral artery. He's very lucky he's not dead.
Yep.
So, meanwhile, speaking of financial difficulties, see all the themes come together. Yeah, the Monarch and Gary/21 go to take out a bank loan to basically get a new hover cocoon so they can up their arch rating. Now, we both got stumped on what this bank was a reference to, because it is a very movie-looking bank. And I was thinking, like, is it possible it's the bank from The Mask?
Oh, wow.
Like, where Jim Carrey works in the beginning of the movie? Like, or, you know, have I seen it in, like, a bank robbery scene? I couldn't tell
Probably.
which, because it's, like, all of these, like, desks out in, like an open plan. You know, they've got the sort of green lampshade stuff going on. It's all very sort of like dark wood tones and leather.
Well, they have the 2-color marble, which is heinous, actually, but it is a thing. I was like, this is referencing a particular architectural style, even, to have the red marble and the gray marble in the same inlay, which is more expensive and looks really tacky generally. So I think it's from the late 19th century to early 20th century, but I don't know exactly what movie.
What it's a reference to. So, what is the Monarch wearing when he goes to apply for
He is wearing a Monarch color-themed Adidas tracksuit, which is very specific. I don't know, like, when I think of Adidas tracksuit wearing, I think of either that revival in the 90s that kind of came out of the house scene, but really the original Adidas tracksuit wearing style is like straight out of New York City hip hop culture, and like, you know, hip hop songs, you know, like My Adidas is referring to shoes, but they were, you know, like Run DMC wore Adidas tracksuits. I don't really know if there's a significance, actually, but that is what he's wearing.
Right. And so it turns out, unfortunately for the Monarch, that not only is he not getting a bank loan, but his trust fund at the bank is tapped out and overdrawn.
Oh, boy. And I think that's, I mean, of course, like, he deserves it, but it's also interesting on a metaphorical level. Like, the past season, he's been drawing on the creativity and ingenuity of his dad. He's been using that intellectual inheritance and that legacy inheritance instead of building his own.
Right, and I mean, that's kind of like, especially on the financial side, like, you go back to previous seasons, he has always been a trust fund baby, basically. Spending his dead parents' money on revenge against Rusty, for as far as we can tell at this point, stealing his toy truck. When they were both like 3 or something. So the Monarch's reaction, you know, his entirely rational response, is to strip down his Adidas tracksuit, revealing his Monarch costume, and try to rob the bank, only to be foiled by the Brown Widow, who tries for and fails to do like a Spider-Man style snarky put down. In part because the Monarch is more distracted by, like, where does the webbing actually come from? One slightly weird detail is that 21 just sort of sits in the car as all of this is happening, even as the Monarch is getting his ass kicked, and, like, asking him, like, open the car, start the engine. I don't know, it's slightly strange.
Yeah, 21 is usually a little bit more responsive than that.
Yeah, although, you know, maybe this is like an ongoing thing of, like, him having second thoughts about being a supervillain. So we go back to Dean in college, and he finds out that his new substitute teacher for Philosophy 102 is the wrestling coach and U.S. military historian Tosh Tompkins.
Which I love the name because that's definitely a reference to Peter Parker's bully, Flash Thompson, who also was Spider-Man's biggest fan. The whole plotline between Peter Parker and Flash Thompson is one of my favorite like Silver through Bronze Age comic interrelationship character lines, so I always appreciate seeing that acknowledged. But that's another story about it. It's really, really pretty realistic and true to life. Anyhow,
and we've seen Tosh Tompkins actually in previous seasons.
We have
bullying,
because bullying Spider-Man. Sorry, bullying Brown Widow. I'm sorry, bullying the Brown Widow's human. What's his name when he's not?
Brown Widow, Venture Brothers. His name is Jared something?
Jared something,
we don't know the last name.
Well, it really should be alliterative, and if it isn't, I demand my money back.
Jared Johnson.
Sure. So, yeah, he's already been established as being that particular kind of bully. And they make joke. He when he comes in late, he says, "Hey, Bjorn Borg, you're late," which is, he's wearing that tennis-style headband, which Bjorn Borg made famous.
And his
tennis player Bjorn Borg, I should say.
And his response to being a substitute teacher, like many substitute teachers, is to put in a videotape instead of trying to actually learn enough to do your job. Speaking as someone who once taught the history of Islam with absolutely no preparation on the history of Islam, anyone who can't read a chapter ahead of their students is just not putting in the effort. Especially if you put in Zack Snyder's 300, which is a terrible source for anything about Plato's Republic. And about U.S. It's terrible if your expertise is on, even if his expertise is on U.S. military history, which we'll say why later, you should still know that Zack Snyder's 300 is not even an accurate portrayal of military history. Right. It's really super racist. Don't watch it. Also, it's bad. The riff tracks is pretty entertaining, though. You'll understand the significance of the line, "Give him some haggis and tell him I'll be right there." Yeah, pretty much the only good thing about that movie is the Raining Men YouTube music video, which is great. Anyway, so as Dean is coming out of class, he runs into Serena. They are standing, like, literally at the doors of the philosophy building on Columbia's campus, complete with a copy of Rodin's Thinker, which I always thought was, like, one of the most on-the-nose public art decisions ever. It's like, yes, we get it, philosophy. Meanwhile, Rusty is in hospital. Brock and Hatred spar over who should be bodyguarding him. And meanwhile, they have one of my favorite jump cuts, which is Hatred is left helper in charge of the front desk, and they cut to helper, like, losing his mind, pointing a gun at everyone. Yeah, he's just panicking, like, there, yeah. So, Rusty wakes up, and he only cares about what Dean's doing. Hank comes in with proposals to, like, remodel his room, and he cuts Hank off financially because Hank won't go to college. Again, the theme of the episode. And this is where, like, my Arthur Miller antennae started going up, because, like, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, granted, this is, like, a theme that the Venture Brothers have done before. There are a lot of themes in this episode of, like, fathers and sons, death of a salesman, right? There's two brothers, the father has a favorite, but, you know, they're both, they're both sort of bucking against the role that's been imposed on them by the previous generation. Whether or not that has to do with super science. Actually, Arthur Miller on super science would be amazing. So, what else is important about this hospital room? Well, it's the same hospital room that Think Tank. Remember him from last season? He's the Dr. Cornell West meets MODOK, giant head. He's in that room recuperating, and I was worried about that guy because he sustained a really horrible injury and seemed like he was probably a good dude. So I guess he's convalescing. Okay, Monarch is depressed. Yes. Because he's broke. But the way this is revealed is that he's basically as if you're saying he's having a temper tantrum. And he really is acting like a toddler having a temper tantrum. He's breaking the light fixtures. I mean, he's full length on the floor. Yeah, yeah. He's like, with his, like, shaking his hands, like, why can't I have it the way I want? Dr. Mrs. encourages him to, quote, work the program.
which is literally the language that they tell people for 12-step program, right? So whenever people who are in like NA or OA or whatever are like having problems with like using this particular system, which has scientifically been proven to usually not work for people, their sponsors encourage them to like trust in the program and continue to work the program, to continue to work the steps to get the end result of being cured of what is a mental illness.
Yeah. And speaking of like weird mental health strategies, Dr. Mrs. the Monarch uses a very strained butterfly metaphor to get the Monarch to buck up, which, you know, kind of works because he doesn't really know anything about butterflies, as is well established. But it's also freaky because apparently the Monarch butterfly in lucite on his desk is his, I guess you'd have to call it his foster mom.
Yeah.
Which is just freaky.
Well, you know, like, if your mom is a butterfly and she just drops dead, like, I think that's probably the proper way to memorialize her body.
I mean, you know, sure, like, I know some people keep, ashes in an urn on the mantelpiece, but, like, normally you don't have their corpse in clear plastic.
I know. As a fellow Jewish person, I find the public display of dead bodies very uncomfortable.
Right. Anyway, so we then go to, and this is one of my favorite new ideas of the episode, the Dean of Sciences, Dr. Von Helping, which a joke on Dr. Von Helsing, who is a total Carl Sagan lookalike. I know they talk about Paul Atreides later on, but like the like high neck turtleneck,
yeah,
the long 70s hair. Anyway, so he and Dean sort of bond over sort of the way that the super science world can sort of pull you in, that it has its own like kind of gravity. I thought they might go for a full Al Pacino, you know, they're every time I think I'm getting out, they pull me back in. But no. Dr. Von Helping sort of argues for the good that science can do. And Dean agrees to try one science class and picks botany as the least super sciencey imaginable.
Surely they've heard of the works of Dr. Pamela Isley, PhD, or are they just going to continue to underplay the contributions of women in the sciences?
Quite possibly. My thought was, you know, given that it's, again, Columbia University, I mean, physics for poets, right? It's right there.
Oh, is that, what is that?
I mean, physics for poets is basically the, like, token. I'm not even sure if it exists anymore because they redid the science core curriculum at Columbia a couple years ago. But it used to be the, like, you know, easy as hell physics course that non-science majors could take. It's the equivalent of, you know, English 101 for, engineering students.
I see, which they really should need because they're very bad at communicating internally. Not that I have experience with that. I would just say, as a Sarah Lawrence student, I wasn't forced to take anything in science or math whatsoever.
Well, see, Columbia University is famous for its core curriculum where everybody has to take everything, which is why the engineering students end up having to take, you know, philosophy and English literature courses. I managed to get through the sciences through anthropology and psychology.
That's not science. I took both of those things. That's not science.
Hey, take it up with the deans, not me.
Good God. Had I only known,
my diploma and moved on.
Had I only known I could have gotten through that way, I would have applied. I would have never gotten in. But yeah, to explain Dr. Pamela Isley, that's Poison Ivy from the DC Comics world. I noticed the wonderful "Take Whales, Not Bombs" sign up on his wall. I had to rewind and look at it a few times. It's a nuclear bomb that's entering the ocean. I might not be quite reading what the words are, but there's some image of a nuclear bomb in the ocean and whales around it. I wasn't sure. Test whales, not bombs, maybe?
I mean, that doesn't make any more sense, but it's at least a political slogan that refers to an actual issue.
Well, I thought maybe the whale is wide whale. Maybe it's anti-wide whale or something.
I don't know. Anyway, so Hank, his new plan to deal with his money issues now that he's officially cut off is to basically turn his room into an Air BnB, although being Hank, he decides to invent his own crowdsourced realtor slash hotelier, Air BnB.
Brought to you by HankCo. Yeah, Airbnb is a huge issue that's a problem in cities all over America, probably all over the world. The challenge that we have in New York is that Airbnb, it sounds like it's going to just be individual people lending rooms out to other folks in order to offset the cost of their housing. But actually, a lot of it is illegal hotels. And you've seen this. We've all been to buildings where your friend is staying and you go in there and it's literally nothing but Airbnb units in the apartment building. ShareBetter.org is a coalition of affordable housing organizations and unions, and they estimate that 13,000 plus units in New York City are off the market due to Airbnb. Like apartments that people could be renting are not actually rented to people. They're now illegal hotel rooms. In fact, we saw that 75% of listings in black neighborhoods had white hosts, basically. So it's either gentrifiers renting out rooms rather than it being the story that they tried to tell in their TV spots of it being like, oh, actually black and brown families are renting out rooms so they can afford rent. Like, nope, it's actually white people doing it. And corporations and stuff like that. So yeah, check out sharebetter.org. I'm not saying you should never ever stay in Airbnb ever in your life. Like sometimes it happens, but you should at least get educated about the issues that it presents.
Right. Ethical consumption under capitalism is impossible. But
exactly.
You should at least try.
At least understand the issue, and just don't sign on to any bullshit petitions saying that Airbnb shouldn't be regulated, because it needs to be for our safety. Fun also, the network the Wi-Fi network is Rust for Life, reference to the Iggy Pop song Lust for Life, probably not a reference to the film about Van Gogh. And the password is Kate Jackson Meow.
Oh, there's the Kate Jackson reference. Okay.
Yeah, she's the brunette from Charlie's Angels.
Aha.
So that's not Hank or Dean. That's Dr. Rusty Venture, I think.
Gotcha. So Hank decides to take the money and stalk his girlfriend, who is busy with college.
Yeah, and his harasser voice, where he's like, hey, baby, like he's doing a sort of like Latino street harasser voice. It's not okay. Like, it doesn't sound like his Enrico Matassa voice, and even that would be a little bit questionable. This seems like a different ethnic stereotype voice. The show really needs to get a consultant.
It's also just a really weird, like, why is that the strategy that you... I mean,
yeah,
granted, Hank is...
hit him.
I mean, she's about to mace him.
She's about to mace him, but after she found out it was Hank, she still should have hit him anyway, just from shock.
Yeah, and it's just, also for doing, a really bullshit thing. Anyway...
There's a monarch butterfly in the flower bouquet. Did you see it?
Ah, I missed that.
I don't know why.
But it sort of sets up this whole thing that, like, Hank thinks that he's, like, taking the cool, fun, easy route of not going to college. But the problem is everyone else has stuff in their life that they're doing, and he doesn't anymore. And so, I think he's feeling kind of lonely and left out, which, okay, but you should still deal with it in a better way than this.
Yeah. And I don't think that he doesn't have to go to college. He tried to work. He could try to get a different job,
Yeah, but like I feel like the pizza delivery thing, I don't know how much of, like, he wasn't trying to, like, go out and rent his own apartment on a pizza delivery guy's salary. Like, I think that was more a sort of a sop to his dad. I mean, it's just, I guess the thing is that, like, in a show that's very much about people being stuck in the past or trying to move on, it seems like Dean is, like, thoroughly trying to move, as you said, like, move forward, define himself, whereas Hank wants to stay where he is, and is having problems with that. So,
yeah.
Meanwhile, the Monarch experiments with a new hair gel that's, I guess, more affordable and a little bit minty green.
Yeah, it's just an overly, like, hair gel is glue. That's actually what hair gel is. Pomade is a wax-based product, so it's going to have a more flexible hold. And he does say that on the show. The writers are aware of hair products.
And we get two great Dune references in a row.
Yeah.
One to Peter de Vries, who played one of the Mentats, sort of supercomputer human people, who had some crazy big eyebrows.
In the book as well as in the movie.
Yeah.
And then they reference Dr. Van Helping's very Paul Atreides-looking hair, which is true.
Yeah. So Serena then shows up in Dean's botany class, and they talk dads and super science.
Yeah, he wanted her to go into marine biology, and of course no. But there's only 2 students in that course, though. Wouldn't that have been canceled?
Speaking as someone who absolutely doesn't have 9 students in his course this semester, I don't know. I mean, the whole thing does seem a little bit fishy in that also there's very few, like, undergraduate courses in the evening.
Yeah, that's true. That is... It was pitch black out that late.
Yeah, especially, like, a botany lab class, like, because lab classes tend to, like, run long, so they tend to be earlier in the day. Anyway, so... What about Dr. Dr. Helping's?
Oh, yeah. Dr. Van Helping has a massive multicolored scarf. I thought maybe it was like an Oxford scarf. They have different patterns for each of the different schools in Oxford University, and the scarves are like longer than humans are tall. But his actually is like multicolored and multi-textured. So I'm not exactly sure what it's from. Incidentally, Harry Potter's scarf Mishigas is all taken from the actual Oxford stuff. So if you guys have a more specific reference to this, it's not the Doctor Who 4th Doctor scarf, that's for sure.
So at that point, obviously the Monarch crashes the course because, like, it's perfect for making Dean freak out. At the same time, and I will say, like, to give him credit, even though, like, he doesn't particularly want to arch this guy. Like, he's giving it his gusto.
The character of Dr. Van Helping makes you think that Van Helping wouldn't want to be arched.
Yeah, well, I think that he had a huge problem with being arched, hence what happens later in the episode.
Yeah, but I think, like, isn't the system mean that he would have to have consented to being arched, and yet
It's possible, but, on the other hand... It seems like there's a bit of an exception for people who are kind of born into it, because, like, JJ didn't sign up for being arched and got arched anyway. And my guess is, as the son of a famous villain, like, he's deemed to be fair game.
Gotcha. That's fucked up. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, so back at Venture HQ, Brock's trying to relax with game night, but Hank's stolen the TV. At the same time, Hatred reacts to the German tourists in Hank's room, and things don't go well.
No.
So, Hank is not in his room or in his other room. He goes to Rusty's hospital room and talks to his dad about not being the favorite son, and this is, like, very Arthur Miller, right? Because, he's pouring his heart out, and to, his father, who's unconscious and can't hear him. And then when the father wakes up, it's this, like, oh my god, you've been hearing it the whole time, yada yada. Except that he's too dopey to, like, actually communicate with Hank, and instead says that he's always liked Kate Jackson the best. And in part, their conversation gets interrupted by the fact that, and here's where our thing about Tosh Tompkins comes back.
Yeah, so why is there's a song starts to get louder happening from the other room. I really wish I could go back and capture the lyrics. I listened to it a few times and wasn't quite able to pull them out.
Yeah, I couldn't track it either, because, like, there was... Anyway, but it's like your typical kind of college quad acoustic guitar, sad rock kind of thing. And now, of course, I realize why he's playing guitar for Think Tank.
Because Josh Tompkins is Stars and Garters, the Captain America pastiche from the earlier season.
Right, but also they're both fellow colleagues from Stuyvesant University, and he's substituting for Think Tank. So clearly there's some sort of,
they're friends.
Interdepartmental collegiality going on here.
Yes, but I hadn't realized that that's who he was until then.
Yeah, neither did I. So I was just, like, really confused about that, and then only when someone on the AV Club comment threads pointed out the identical haircuts, I was like, oh, shit, that makes so much more sense. So, meanwhile, back at the Arching, the Monarch and Gary both hurt themselves hitting Dr. Van Helping because they didn't pay attention to the implications of the son of a metal man who then suffered 80% of burns. Sorry, burns to 80% of his body is probably made of metal. And notably, like, he's totally passive. He doesn't give a shit. So they decide to kidnap Serena. She could care less. Like, she's been around, arches who are like level 8 or 9. So 5s don't really, impress her. But this, like, totally flips out Dr. Von Helping, who bursts into flames, revealing a metal man underneath.
Yeah, he's got like his exterior, I guess, was wax, and it melts off in a very horrific image. And I think his character design underneath is really interesting. Kind of looks like the Metal Men from DC Comics.
Yeah, although the reference is, also kind of close to Doctor Doom a little bit.
I guess that has the black voidish eyes.
Well, also the sort of hideous scarring.
He had hideous scarring?
Sorry?
He had hideous scarring?
Well, Dr. Von Helping, the reason why he's metal is that his father did a super science experiment on him.
Oh.
That caused it,
that's...
scarring over 80% of his body.
That is definitely Dr. Von Doom then, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Dean intervenes, again, like, being just thoroughly pissed off about the way that his life is getting railroaded. The Monarch gives him a somewhat hypocritical speech about privilege, given that, like, the Monarch's been a trust fund baby all his life. So Dean decides to write him a check for $1 million to get him to go away.
That's an interesting thing. Like, the show hasn't really dealt with that before. Anybody trying to literally buy somebody off to go away.
Yeah, it's also, like, the whole economics of the thing has been a little bit, like, how this system works has been a little bit confusing. And here we sort of get a suggestion that, like, part of what pays supervillains to be supervillains is by stealing from their arches. That they just rip them off.
It's a collection racket.
Yeah. So, anyway, turns out that Serena is impressed by Dean's sort of quick thinking, and Dean seems to have a bit of a boner for her, which potentially sets up a love triangle, because ultimately, like, Serena does have a lot more in common with Dean than she does with Hank.
And literally boner, incidentally.
Yeah.
What was I going to say, though? Like, the buying him off thing, like, we know that he has his dad's checkbook. But
yes, which is, I imagine, going to be a point of controversy, because, like, Hank was pissed off that he wasn't considered responsible enough to use the checkbook, and now Dean just spent $1 million.
And yeah, it's $1 million. That's not an amount of money that you just give without having a prior conversation. So I think paying off the Monarch $1 million to go the fuck away is a reasonable action to take, but you discuss that with the other members of the family first.
Yeah, I certainly think it's going to come up again. But after the credits, we find out that it is enough to make the Monarch Arch of the Month, which makes me think that a lot of supervillains are not making much on a month-to-month basis. Doesn't seem to be a very lucrative.
No.
And he gets a tin of his favorite pomade from Dr. Z.
Aw, heartwarming.
Yeah. So, what did you think of this episode?
I enjoyed it. There was... I'm not, like I mentioned before, I'm not super interested in a retread of the Monarch trying to climb the ladder yet again and have that be his only obstacle. I don't know that that's necessarily is in store for. But I really enjoyed the familial challenges. I really am interested in seeing the Venture Brothers dealing with the college environment, and I appreciated how rooted in the city the show continues to be. What about you?
I like the Columbia University stuff, and as we said, the whole Hudsucker Proxy thing. I think I would feel different about this episode if it didn't come after one of my favorite episodes. So I think it's sort of it suffers a little bit in comparison to Arrears in Science, but it's a perfectly fine episode. You know what it felt like to me? I mean, I know that supposedly we're getting 10 episodes this season.
Yeah. Wow.
But this felt very much like an episode 1. That they'd fired their fireworks from the sort of the quote unquote finale episode last time.
Yes, this is the beginning of episode 7. This is the new status quo.
Exactly. It's setting up the new status quo, the new conflicts, etc., which you have to do, even though that's not the most exciting thing in the world.
And, hopefully I'll have an opportunity to go on at great length about the importance of the Flash Thompson-Peter Parker relationship in the future, so there's always that. Well, thank you. I think that's all we have for today.
Yep.
So for folks, remember this podcast is brought to you by Graphic Policy. We're on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, but mostly Blog Talk Radio and on iTunes. Our website is graphicpolicy.com. You can find me online. I'm Elana _Brooklyn. That's ELANA _Brooklyn on Twitter. Just this past week, I was just on the Wrong Reel podcast, which is a fabulous film podcast. I was there to talk about 2 of Fritz Lang's U.S. films. One of them was Fury, the other, which is basically like an anti-lynching suspense story starring Spencer Tracy. It's incredibly political and really good movie. And then everybody's favorite film noir, which is The Big Heat, also very rooted in politics, but very much a classic film noir. So if you want to hear me talk about 2 film noir type movies and the works of Fritz Lang in America, because I think he's one of the most underrated American directors, check it out. So that's at Wrong Reel, WRONGREEL. Stephen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Stephen Attewell. You can find me on Tumblr and WordPress at Race for the Iron Throne.
You been a guest on anything lately?
Let me see. Have I been a guest on, this podcast? Also on Graphic Policy. I'm doing, along with my colleague Chris, an issue-by-issue podcast about the brilliant graphic novel series, or comic book series, The Wicked and the Divine, called The Gods Cast, which you should also find on Graphic Policy and hopefully soon on iTunes as well.
Yeah, it's a really great podcast. You guys should definitely check it out. I'm a huge fan of the series and the podcast. Well, thanks, you guys. And then so you and I will sign off by saying, Go Team Venture Brothers podcast.
Okay, we're never getting this thing right, are we?
I disagree.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.